many believe China has become, quote, very aggressive in the past year in terms of establishing diplomatic relations with countries who have already got diplomatic partnerships with Taiwan. How would you respond?
I think it's improper to use the phrase being aggressive. Maybe it is better to say that Chinese mainland it's not necessary for Chinese mainland to keep self-restraint. You know, in the past, I mean, in Ma Ying-jeou administration, and that time, Chinese mainland was quite cautious, was quite self-restrained. And that time, you know, one of Taiwan's diplomatic partner named Gambia broke its relationship with Taiwan in 2013. But until 2016, did it set a very formal relationship with China. So it lasted for 3 years.
I see.
At that time, you could see Chinese mainland was very cautious. It did not want to hurt Taiwan authority. It did not want to hurt cross-strait relationship. But now the situation has changed.
How?
And Tsai Ing-wen does not accept 1992 consensus, so it's unnecessary for Chinese mainland to keep self-restraint, I think.
Let's go to Ms. Lei, joining us in Taipei through Skype. Ms. Lei, exactly what is 1992 consensus? Explain to our international viewers, particularly who have not followed the issue. And secondly, what would this mean, the breaking up relation by Panama with Taiwan for Ms. Tsai's administration authorities now in Taiwan?
The 1992 consensus documented a historical meeting during which both sides expressed their intention to work together as well as their sovereignty claim. So 92 consensus is a very creative construct that has certain ambiguity built into it so that both sides can maintain certain positions. Built on that creative construct, allowing certain ambiguity, we have been achieving great discussions across Taiwan Straits, especially between KMT and CPC. Between the parties, putting aside the sovereignty claims, allowing the two sides to sign trade pacts as well as administrative cooperations, recognizing each other's official positions in certain areas. And those are the 8 years documented by Ma Ying-jeou's term. After Tsai Ing-wen took office, there has been a very clear question to her, that is whether she will maintain the position as well as maintain the cross-strait relations. Since Tsai Ing-wen refused to answer directly on this creative construct that is ambiguous, mainland China seems to be giving her tests which are more and more clear. Now, in all the severance of diplomatic ties we see in the communique, they are very clearly in terms of positioning mainland China as the sole representative of the whole China, maintaining the position that Taiwan is the inalienable part of the whole of China, as well as asking those countries to not only sever the relationship, but also undertake not to build future official relationship.
Right.
These 4 positions are extremely clear, much more clear than the 92 consensus.
I see. Panama, as you may know, is the 12th country that cut ties with Taiwan since the year 2000. And most of them switched the recognition to the People's Republic of China, the PRC, while some were switching back and forth between Beijing and Taiwan for years before finally setting ties with the Chinese mainland. After Panama's reversal, Taiwan's allies, so-called, expected a domino effect as they think of the remaining countries might also follow suit. Having said that, though, Ms. Lei in Taipei, we have heard about the checkbook diplomacy, or for Ms. Tsai, it's called steadfast diplomacy. Whatever it's called, it means Taiwan authorities are willing to bring out the cash to win a recognition coming from different countries. So will that work once we see some of the examples recently?
Well, I think the international space was created through goodwill and friendship and mutual respect across Taiwan Straits. Without that, we could easily go back to a position that Taiwan had no international relations. Tsai Ing-wen have asked for greater participation in the international community, but now it seems to be extremely clear that without the friendship or goodwill from mainland China, Taiwan's international space will be squashed. And even in the non-diplomatic areas, such as WHA, we've experiencing lots of setbacks. So whatever Tsai Ing-wen plans to do, she'll have to resolve one major issue, that is how to regain the trust, friendship, and goodwill among people across Taiwan Straits, especially from mainland China.
But, you know, Mr. Zhong, the fair question should be also asked to the Chinese mainland. Is China practicing dollar diplomacy by bringing out the cash and win so-called the hearts and minds?
No, I don't think Chinese mainland is playing a dollar diplomacy. It is just the Panama made this decision just because of its own interest. If Panama could set a very formal relationship with China, then it could attract more investment from China, and the trade volume between the two countries would increase dramatically. And this undoubtedly will bring great benefits for the Panama development. So I don't think it is the dollar diplomacy is playing. It is just because of Panama's its own interest.
Some even say, Mr. Zhong, I still need your answer about this from the mainland's perspective. That Taiwan, of course, is a very developed economy for decades, but China is certainly on its upswing in terms of economic development, international links, and even playing some kinds of international leadership when it comes to international governance. But then Taiwan will never be able to compete with the mainland when it comes to this fiscal and monetary power. And therefore, Taiwan is forever on the weaker party side. How would you comment about these kind of arguments?
Yes, one is much stronger, for Chinese mainland, and the other for Taiwan is becoming much weaker. So the two sides is on an unbalanced partnership. But I think this is not about a comparison between the two sides. It is about the international trend. And so there are almost 200 countries have already recognized one China principle and set a formal relationship with China.
You mean 200 countries?
Yes, 200 countries. So I think Panama is just following this international trend.
Having said that, though, Ms. Lei, how do you see, from the Taiwan perspective, the mainland's approach to Taiwan right now? On the one hand, it seems to be very hard-lined, as some describe, toward the Tsai Ing-wen administration, the Taiwan authorities right now. But on the other hand, seem to ardently even go beyond what they used to do to support this people-to-people kinds of exchanges and business ties and economic ties. Will they work?
Well, it is really clear that Taiwan will have to be able to live well with its major neighbor and major partner, whether you have different political positions or belonging to different parties in Taiwan. People have a consensus that the status quo, which is peace and development, is the best route for Taiwan. Now, if we look at countries like Panama, it is not because of the dollar that they're making a choice. It is actually they are choosing between a US-dominated Central and South America and a Central and South America which has another alternative offered by co-development and economic cooperations, infrastructure investments by PRC, by mainland China. So I think it is very clear that those countries make a decision to build a new 21st century. If we, on the side of Taiwan, doesn't take an opposition view towards the rise of China, the mainland China's political might and economic might should be welcome as an opportunity that we can all build a better world. So the challenge is how to overcome the ideological hurdles currently still plaguing the place in Taiwan.
Well, you are saying the challenge is like that, but for the ruling party in Taiwan, probably challenge is another thing. It's a political crisis. And therefore, Mr. Zhong, is it possible that the Tsai Ing-wen Taiwan Authority of this generation likely to be pushed or felt being pushed into a corner and even have more extreme actions and rhetorics as a result regarding the issue of cross-strait relations? Mr. Zhong, very briefly from you.
I think we should not exclude this kind of possibility. For example, in 2002, when a country broke its relationship with Taiwan, then Taiwan declared two states theory. So it's a very horrible experience. So we should be very quite cautious about this kind of
Do you think the mainland is ready about all kinds of possibilities?
Yes, I'm sure.
All right. Ms. Lei, what about a comment from you about that?
Well, I think you are right in pointing out that there are two forces pulling Tsai Ing-wen. On the one hand, people are telling her, I told you so. If you don't recognize 92 consensus, things will get worse. The other part says, well, I told you so too, because if you try to appease mainland China by maintaining the terms such as calling it mainland China and not PRC, you will not get what you have hoped to get. So this second positions is pulling her to a more extremist position. And a lot of people are now arguing that she should actually push the Taiwan independence agenda even harder and even faster.
Joanna Lei, former legislator and head of the research at the Chunghua 21st Century think tank in Taipei. Thank you so much, Ms. Lei, for joining us. Thank you, really appreciate it. And of course, Mr. Zhong will be staying with us for the next part of the discussion. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei coming to you live on CGTN. We continue our discussion about the establishment of diplomatic relations between Panama and China. Still with us here, once again, we have Mr. Zhong Houtao, who is a researcher with the Taiwan Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And in Shanghai, we have Charles Tang, who is the president of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's also the chair of Paraguay-China Chamber. Paraguay is the only now South American country to recognize Taiwan diplomatically. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. What a discussion earlier. And now let's move on as to what are the relationship like for South American countries and China. Let me invite Mr. Tang. You are working in Brazil, you're working in Paraguay. What do you think is really behind the mentality change for Panama this time?
Well, we've heard the Chinese perspective and we heard the Taiwanese perspective. What I would like to present is a perspective from a country like Paraguay, which has no diplomatic relations with China, but you know, our Paraguay-China Chamber has an official decree signed by the president of Paraguay and approved by the Congress of Paraguay. So, you know, when I first set up the conference of how China can benefit Paraguay and its companies, you know, there was, of course, resistance from the Taiwanese diplomats. But I think that, you know, I made it very clear that our chamber is basically dedicated to developing business and building a bridge of friendship, and we're not involved in politics. However, from the Paraguayan perspective, many of the politicians, many of the leaders, and all of the business enterprises would like to have a much closer relationship with China. We have to understand that this is a rapidly changing world. China is taking on a very strong leadership role in the world. And not only that, but China's footprints around the world has been prosperity and development. China does not waste its blood or treasure. It sends its business people to trade and to invest. So countries like Paraguay need railways, need subways, need sewage treatment, water treatment, transmission lines, etc. So I believe that there is a very, very strong current in Paraguay.
All right.
Much like in other countries of Central America and Africa and so on that recognize Taiwan, that they would not like to be left out.
Paraguay is one case study.
From
of course,
this
Panama is a different case study. They have chosen at this point a different decision. But coming back to the issue of Panama, because that's the focus of our discussion today, that is, Ms. Zhong, 8 billion US dollars Chinese investment from the mainland in Panama.
Yes.
without diplomatic relations, what would that mean?
If there is no formal relationship between China and Panama, then those investments from China would not be legally protected, then they would suffer great risk. So the two sides should set up a formal relationship, and in this way, I think Panama would attract more investment from China, not only just about $8 billion US, maybe 10 billion or even much more, I think.
Mr. Tang, it is not just Panama, but rather a lot of the South American countries. With the earlier initiative coming originally from China, Belt and Road, there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for connectivity, for linking up the economic and trade, more exchanges between people to people. It seems that something of an unprecedented scale is going to happen. So at this critical juncture, how can you help us to understand the mentality of countries in South America in terms of what kind of relationship they want to build with China, and in terms of how do they weigh and balance their previous diplomatic relations with some of the players also in this part of the world?
Well, the people from South America or Latin America, want development. They want prosperity. They want to see their countries evolve. And basically, like I said, China is helping so many countries around the world to transform Africa from a lost continent to a continent of hope. Latin America and Caribbean, the backyard of the United States under the Monroe Doctrine, is really planting a Chinese garden, because China is investing. China is helping the countries to develop and to prosper. And the people all over the world, including Central America and South America, admire the speed that China was able to achieve its, let's say, fantastic economic development, and they would like to share in it. They would like to come to China and see more of it. We would like to bring Paraguayan business people and political leaders to come and visit China so they can see for themselves.
I understand political fights about that in Paraguay, for example. Mr. Tang, is quite severe about which side to take and to work with whom for the future. But there's also one element, Mr. Zhong, that Mr. Tang earlier mentioned. It's crucial as well, that it is the United States. We understand the U.S. has been having certain kinds of links with Taiwan for decades over the history. So what about now? Of course, the U.S. commit to one China policy, but there seems to be ups and downs of that commitment.
Yes, the U.S. and Taiwan relationship, just as you said, is experiencing up and downs. Just several months ago, the new leader of the United States, Donald Trump, even said the president of Taiwan called in this way to call Tsai Ing-wen, but then just in a short time, he changed dramatically. Yeah. And then he said he would honor one China policy. I think in future, the United States will still take Taiwan as a bargaining chip for the China and the U.S. relationship. It will continue to take Taiwan as chess on the Sino and U.S. relationship. It will not sincerely to help Taiwan. It just want to take it. But just a bargaining chip.
As a bargaining chip, what would that mean for Latin and American countries and South American countries, Mr. Tang, if the U.S. Once again takes on the issue of Taiwan to use it as a bargaining chip toward China?
I think that the United States no longer controls its backyard. It no longer controls the South American, Latin American countries and the Caribbean, especially under Donald Trump. We can see Mexico branching out to create other alliances. We know that the Workers' Party in Brazil took Brazil and several other South American countries, away from the total alignment with the United States. I think that each country has to look after its own interests. And, countries have interests and not necessarily only friendship. So As long as China is the economic locomotive of the world and is willing to invest to develop these countries,
Right.
you will see more and more countries coming to China's side, only because of their national interests. You know, I believe that we will see countries like Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, even, you know, Paraguay, reevaluating its situation and saying, gee, you know, China with one investment can double our GDP. But Paraguay GDP is only $29 billion.
Right.
China over the last 3 years has invested much more than that into Brazil, for example.
That's true. Having said that, my last question for you, Mr. Zhong. Of course, connectivity, trade and economic links, crucial. Panama, there is also something called Panama Canal. So not just political issues, but also economic and trade issues. Will there be much possibility of a conflict between China and the United States as more South American countries developing more closer ties with the mainland?
Yes, maybe just as the United States take South Latin American countries as its backyard. So maybe the United States and China relationship will become much more complicated for this issue. But I think the general trend for Sino and US relationship is very healthy. So we don't have to be much worried for the future development for these two countries' development.
I see.